This is the true account of the Bear of Sankebetsu, known in Japanese as Kesagake, which terrorized a remote settlement in Hokkaido during the harsh winter of 1915. Over the course of several days in December, this massive brown bear killed 7 people and injured 3 others, making it one of the deadliest bear attacks in Japanese history. The incident is remembered not only for its tragic toll, but also for the way it exposed the vulnerability of frontier communities and the deadly power of Hokkaido's largest predator. What followed was a desperate hunt through snow-covered forests that would test the resolve and skill of local hunters in their battle against a creature that had lost all fear of humans. The year 1915 found Hokkaido still very much a frontier territory. Japan's northernmost island had been systematically colonized for only 50 years, and much of its interior remained wild and untamed. Vast forests of birch and pine stretched across rolling hills and valleys, broken only by scattered farming settlements and the occasional mining camp. Winter arrived early and stayed long, blanketing the landscape in snow that could reach depths of several meters. Sankebetsu was one of these frontier settlements, located in what is now part of Rumoi subprefecture. The village consisted of perhaps a dozen families who had carved their homes from the wilderness, building sturdy wooden houses designed to withstand the brutal northern winters. These structures sat low and solid, their steep roofs designed to shed heavy snow loads. Thick walls and small windows helped retain precious heat from wood-burning stoves that worked continuously through the long, dark months. The residents were hardy people who had come north seeking opportunity in farming, logging, or mining. They lived largely self-sufficient lives, preserving food through the growing season to last through winter, hunting and trapping to supplement their supplies, and relying on their neighbors when times grew difficult. Most families kept livestock in small barns attached to their homes, and many maintained root cellars stocked with vegetables, pickled foods, and other provisions. Communication with the outside world was limited and slow. The nearest larger town lay many kilometers away over rough terrain that became nearly impassable during heavy snowfalls. Most news arrived with occasional travelers or supply deliveries, and help from authorities could take days to arrive even under the best conditions. This isolation bred a fierce independence among the settlers, but it also left them vulnerable when serious trouble arose. The forests surrounding Sankebetsu teemed with wildlife. Deer, wild boar, foxes, and smaller game provided hunting opportunities for those skilled enough to pursue them. But the apex predator of these woods was the Ushuri brown bear, known locally as the higuma. These massive creatures could weigh over 400 kilograms and stand nearly 3 meters tall on their hind legs. Most bears avoided human contact and retreated deeper into the wilderness as settlements expanded, but occasionally one would lose its natural fear and become dangerous. December brought particularly heavy snows to the Sankebetsu area in 1915. By early in the month, drifts had piled high around the houses, and residents found themselves confined largely to well-worn paths between buildings. The cold was sharp and constant, forcing families to burn through their carefully hoarded firewood supplies more quickly than usual. It was during this time that several villagers began noticing unusual tracks in the snow around the settlement's perimeter. The prints were enormous, clearly those of a bear, far larger than most anyone had seen before. The tracks measured over 30 centimeters in length, with claw marks extending well beyond the pad impressions. What made these discoveries particularly troubling was their location close to houses and the fact that they appeared fresh, indicating the animal was active despite the deep winter cold when bears should have been hibernating. Local hunters examined the tracks with growing concern. The size suggested an exceptionally large male, and the boldness of its approach to human habitation was deeply unusual. Most bears gave settlements a wide berth, but these tracks came within mere meters of occupied homes. Some prints were found near storage sheds and animal pens, suggesting the bear was investigating potential food sources. The villagers held discussions about what should be done. Some argued for organizing hunting parties to track and kill the animal before it caused trouble. Others believed it would likely move on if left alone, retreating deeper into the forest, as bears typically did when encountering human activity. A few expressed the opinion that the severe winter might have driven the animal from its normal territory in search of food, and that warmer weather would resolve the problem naturally. The debate was cut short by more ominous signs. Several families reported hearing heavy footsteps around their homes at night, accompanied by deep grunting sounds that could only come from a very large bear. Livestock grew restless and difficult to manage, seeming to sense a predator nearby. Most disturbing of all, the bear had apparently investigated the root cellar of one family leaving massive claw marks in the frozen earth where it had attempted to dig. These developments convinced even the most optimistic villagers that they faced a serious threat. The bear was not only unusually large, but also unusually bold, showing none of the typical wariness that kept its kind away from human settlements. Worse, its behavior suggested it was actively seeking food sources and had identified the village as a promising hunting ground. The first victims were members of the Ta family, who lived in a sturdy farmhouse on the settlement's eastern edge. Mayu Ta was a widow who shared her home with her baby grandson and several other family members. Like most frontier dwellings, the house was built low and solid with thick wooden walls, but its isolation made it particularly vulnerable to the prowling bear. On the afternoon of the 9th of December, Mayu was working inside the house while caring for her infant grandson. The other adults had gone about their daily tasks, some working in nearby outbuildings, others visiting neighbors or attending to business in different parts of the settlement. The baby was resting quietly, and the house felt secure despite the deep snow and bitter cold outside. The attack came without warning. The massive bear somehow forced its way into the house, possibly through a door that had not been properly secured, or by breaking through a window or wall. The sound of splintering wood and Mayu's screams alerted neighbors, but the assault was over within moments. When help arrived, they found a scene of devastating violence. Mayu had been killed instantly, and the baby had also perished. The bear had ransacked the interior of the house, overturning furniture and scattering belongings in its search for food. Claw marks gouged deep into wooden beams showed the incredible strength of the animal, while the destruction made clear that this was no ordinary bear encounter. The news of the attack spread through the village like wildfire. Within hours, every resident knew that the prowling bear had escalated from a potential threat to an active killer. The fact that it had entered a human dwelling and attacked people inside overturned all conventional understanding of bear behavior. This was not a defensive reaction to being surprised or cornered, but a deliberate predatory assault. Families immediately began taking precautions that went far beyond normal winter security measures. Doors were reinforced and kept constantly barred. Windows were shuttered and blocked with heavy furniture. Some families moved their sleeping quarters to interior rooms away from exterior walls. Others arranged to stay with neighbors rather than remain alone in isolated houses. The village's few firearms were cleaned, loaded, and kept within easy reach. Men who had served in the military retrieved old service rifles from storage, while others prepared hunting weapons and farming tools that might serve as defensive implements. Everyone understood that the normal rules no longer applied. They were dealing with a rogue predator that viewed humans as prey. The brutal attack on the Ota family galvanized the village into immediate action. Within hours of discovering the bodies, the settlement's leaders had organized the first of several hunting parties designed to track down and kill the rogue bear. The urgency was obvious to everyone. An animal that had killed humans inside their own home would certainly kill again unless stopped. The initial hunting party consisted of 6 men, including the village's most experienced hunters and trackers. They carried the best available firearms, a mix of military rifles, hunting guns, and improvised weapons. Most were armed with older single-shot rifles, though a few possessed more modern repeating weapons. Ammunition was precious and limited, making accurate shooting essential. The hunters began by examining the scene at the Ta house, looking for tracks and other signs that might indicate the bear's direction of travel. The snow around the building was heavily disturbed, showing where the animal had approached, entered, and eventually departed. The tracks leading away from the house were clear and fresh, providing an obvious trail to follow. The bear had headed northeast from the village, moving through thick forest toward higher ground. Its tracks showed a confident, unhurried pace rather than the rapid flight that might be expected from an animal fleeing the scene of an attack. This behavior troubled the experienced hunters, who recognized it as further evidence of the bear's unusual boldness and lack of fear. The hunting party followed the trail through increasingly difficult terrain. The snow was deep and soft, making progress slow and exhausting. The forest was dense with undergrowth and fallen trees that had to be navigated carefully. Visibility was limited by the thick canopy overhead and the dim winter light that penetrated the woods. After several hours of tracking, the hunters found where the bear had stopped to rest and feed. The site showed clear evidence that the animal had consumed parts of its human victims, confirming the worst fears about its behavior. This discovery eliminated any remaining hope that the attack had been defensive or accidental. The bear was actively hunting humans for food. The trail continued deeper into the wilderness, but growing darkness and exhaustion forced the hunting party to abandon the pursuit for the day. They marked their progress and returned to the village to report their findings and prepare for a renewed effort the following morning. The news that the bear had actually fed on human flesh spread quickly through the settlement, deepening the already profound sense of fear and urgency. The hunting party resumed their pursuit at first light on the 10th of December, determined to prevent further attacks. The weather had turned even colder during the night, and fresh snow had begun to fall, threatening to obscure the bear's trail. Speed was now essential if they hoped to catch up to their quarry before losing the track entirely. The hunters found that the bear had continued moving northeast during the night, but at some point had changed direction and begun heading back toward the village. This discovery sent a chill through the pursuers that had nothing to do with the bitter cold. The animal was not fleeing into the deep wilderness as expected, but rather circling back toward the settlement where more potential victims waited. The implications were terrifying. This was not the behavior of a normal bear that had made a single opportunistic attack on humans. Instead, it suggested a predator that had identified the village as a reliable source of food and was actively hunting its residents. The bear appeared to be treating humans the same way it might approach a deer, herd, or salmon run, as prey to be systematically harvested. The hunting party picked up their pace despite the difficult conditions, racing to intercept the bear before it could reach the village. But the animal had several hours head start, and the rough terrain made rapid movement nearly impossible for the human pursuers. They pushed forward as quickly as they could manage, following the increasingly fresh tracks through the snow-laden forest. As they drew closer to the settlement, the hunters began hearing sounds from the direction of the village, shouts, screams, and the barking of dogs. The terrible realization dawned that they were too late. The bear had reached the settlement ahead of them and was already conducting another attack. The men abandoned all attempt at stealth and ran toward the sounds of commotion, crashing through the underbrush and snowdrifts as fast as their exhausted legs could carry them. They could see smoke rising from the direction of the village, though whether from normal heating fires or some emergency was impossible to determine at their distance. When they finally emerged from the forest, they found the settlement in chaos. Villagers were running between houses, some carrying weapons, while others shouted warnings and instructions. The bear had struck again, and once more it had chosen to attack inside a human dwelling rather than in the open where it might have been more easily confronted. The bear's second attack had targeted the Miyok family home, located roughly in the center of the village. Like the Ata house, it was a solid wooden structure designed to withstand harsh winters, but this had provided no protection against the determined predator. The scene that greeted the returning hunters was even more horrific than what they had found at the first attack site. The bear had somehow gained entry to the Miyok house during the late morning hours when most of the family was inside, preparing the midday meal. The attack had been swift and brutal, claiming the lives of multiple family members before anyone could mount an effective defense or escape to safety. The violence was so sudden and overwhelming that neighbors had heard only brief screams before silence fell over the house. When help arrived, they found that Yasutaro Miyoke had been killed, along with his wife and one of their children. Another child had been severely injured but was still alive, though in critical condition from massive trauma inflicted by the bear's claws and teeth. The interior of the house showed the same devastating destruction as the ETA residence, with furniture smashed and belongings scattered throughout the rooms. Most disturbing of all, the bear was still inside the house when the first rescuers arrived. The massive animal had claimed the dwelling as its own temporary territory and showed no inclination to flee despite the presence of humans outside. It could be heard moving around inside, occasionally emitting deep, growling sounds that carried clearly through the wooden walls. The situation presented an unprecedented crisis for the village leadership. They had an active killer inside one of their homes, with more potential victims scattered throughout the settlement in buildings that offered no more protection than those already breached. The normal response of waiting for the bear to leave on its own was clearly inadequate, given the animal's aggressive behavior and apparent lack of fear. Several men positioned themselves around the Miyok house with firearms, hoping to get a clear shot when the bear eventually emerged. But the animal seemed content to remain inside, and the rescuers were reluctant to attempt an entry that might provoke another attack. The injured child needed immediate medical attention, but reaching the victim would require confronting the bear in the confined space of the house interior. The standoff continued for hours, with armed men maintaining watch over the occupied house, while other villagers worked frantically to secure their own homes and evacuate vulnerable family members to more defensible positions. The bear's continued presence in the heart of the settlement made it impossible for normal life to continue, and demonstrated just how completely the predator had disrupted the community. As darkness approached on the 10th of December, the village faced an impossible situation. The bear remained barricaded inside the Miyok house, with the body of an injured child who desperately needed medical attention. Every hour of delay reduced the victim's chances of survival, but entering the house meant confronting an enraged predator in close quarters, where firearms would be difficult to use effectively. The village leaders convened an emergency meeting to discuss options. Some argued for attempting to smoke the bear out by building fires around the house, though this risked burning down the structure with the injured child inside. Others suggested trying to lure the animal out with food, but none were confident this would work, given that the bear already had access to human flesh within the dwelling. The most experienced hunter in the group, an older man named Yamamoto who had served in the military and hunted throughout Hokkaido for decades, proposed a direct assault on the house. His plan involved several armed men entering simultaneously through different openings to prevent the bear from focusing its attack on a single target. It was an extremely dangerous strategy, but the alternative was allowing the injured child to die while the predator remained in control of the settlement center. As the men prepared for this desperate action, the situation suddenly changed. The bear emerged from the house on its own, apparently having finished feeding and grown tired of confinement. It moved slowly and deliberately, showing no signs of haste or fear despite the presence of multiple armed humans nearby. The animal's casual behavior was perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire encounter. The hunters had positioned themselves around the house in anticipation of exactly this moment, but when it came, their response was far from coordinated. The first shot came from a nervous young man who fired too quickly and missed his target entirely. The sound of the gunshot startled the other hunters, causing several to fire wildly without taking proper aim. Most of the bullets went wide or struck the ground near the bear without causing significant injury. The bear reacted to the gunfire not with flight, but with aggressive charges toward the shooters. Its incredible speed and agility in the deep snow caught several hunters off guard, forcing them to abandon their positions and retreat toward other buildings. One man narrowly escaped being caught when the bear chased him around a storage shed, only avoiding attack when other hunters distracted the animal with more gunfire. The chaotic battle continued for several minutes as the hunters tried to regroup and coordinate their efforts while the bear moved between them, sometimes advancing aggressively and other times withdrawing to assess the situation. The animal's intelligence was clearly evident in how it used buildings and terrain features for cover while avoiding exposure to multiple shooters simultaneously. Despite the initial confusion and poor marksmanship, the hunters eventually managed to wound the bear severely enough to drive it away from the immediate village area. Multiple bullets had found their mark, and the animal was clearly injured and bleeding as it retreated toward the forest. The immediate threat to the settlement had been reduced, though not eliminated entirely. The rescued child from the Miyok house was rushed to receive what medical care was available in the remote settlement. The injuries were severe and the prognosis uncertain, but at least the victim was now receiving attention rather than lying helpless in a house controlled by a predator. The other casualties were collected and prepared for burial according to local customs and religious practices. The villagers spent the night of the 10th of December in a state of high alert, expecting the wounded bear to return at any moment for another attack. Guards were posted around the settlement's perimeter, while families huddled together in the most secure buildings available. Few people slept, and those who did kept weapons within easy reach, and one ear tuned for any sound that might indicate the predator's return. The bear's tracks were examined closely by torchlight, revealing significant blood loss that gave some hope the animal might not survive its wounds. But experienced hunters warned against optimism, noting that bears were remarkably tough creatures, capable of surviving injuries that would kill most other animals. A wounded bear could also be even more dangerous than a healthy one, driven to desperation and more likely to attack anything it encountered. Dawn on the 11th of December revealed fresh snowfall that had covered much of the blood trail, but enough traces remained to show that the bear had indeed retreated into the forest. A new hunting party was organized immediately, this time with better weapons and more experienced shooters. The men were determined to finish what they had started and end the threat permanently. The new hunting party included several volunteers from neighboring settlements who had heard about the attacks and come to help. These reinforcements brought additional firearms and ammunition, as well as specialized hunting knowledge that might prove crucial in tracking a wounded predator through difficult terrain. The combined group represented the largest and best-equipped force the region could assemble. The hunters also benefited from daylight and clearer weather conditions that would make tracking easier and shooting more accurate. They followed the blood trail from the village into the forest, noting that the bear was moving more slowly than before and stopping frequently to rest. The regular blood spots in the snow suggested ongoing hemorrhaging that would weaken the animal over time. The hunting party tracking the wounded bear made steady progress through the morning hours of the 11th of December. The blood trail was clear and relatively fresh, indicating that their quarry remained nearby rather than having fled deep into the wilderness. The bear's movements showed none of the purposeful direction of the previous day's tracking, suggesting instead an animal in distress trying to find a place to recover from its wounds. After several hours of pursuit, the hunters discovered where the bear had attempted to den up in a shallow cave formed by overlapping boulders and fallen trees. The site showed extensive bloodstaining and signs of restless movement, indicating the animal had spent considerable time there but had been unable to settle properly. Fresh tracks leading away from the site were more erratic than before, weaving between trees rather than following straight lines. The pursuing hunters examined the improvised den carefully, noting that the bear had tried unsuccessfully to create a proper winter shelter. Normally, brown bears would have been deep in hibernation by this point in December, but the animal's abnormal behavior had kept it active through the period when it should have been dormant. The failed attempt at denning suggested that even the wounded bear recognized its need for rest and recovery. Following the increasingly erratic trail, the hunting party came across evidence that the bear had attempted to hunt normal prey during its retreat. Tracks showed where it had pursued deer through the snow, but the chase patterns were shorter and less sustained than would be expected from a healthy predator. The wounds were clearly affecting the animal's hunting ability and overall strength. This discovery gave the hunters hope that their quarry might be weakening to the point where it could be overtaken and killed. However, it also raised concerns about what a desperate, wounded bear might do if cornered. The animal had already demonstrated its willingness to attack humans, and desperation could make it even more dangerous to approach. The blood trail led the hunters deeper into heavily forested terrain where visibility was limited and the risk of ambush increased significantly. The bear could be hiding behind any of the numerous large trees or rock formations, ready to charge any pursuers who came too close. The hunting party was forced to proceed more cautiously, constantly scanning the surrounding area for signs of movement or danger. As afternoon approached, the hunters realized they were facing a tactical dilemma. The bear was clearly wounded and possibly weakening, but it remained a formidable opponent in terrain that favored its natural abilities over human weapons. A direct confrontation in the dense forest would be extremely dangerous, but allowing the animal to escape meant it might recover and return to threaten the village once again. The hunting party's caution proved justified when they lost the blood trail in a particularly dense section of forest where multiple deer paths and natural obstacles had obscured the bear's tracks. Despite careful searching, they were unable to relocate clear signs of their quarry's passage and were forced to admit that the wounded animal had escaped, at least temporarily. The hunters spread out to search a wider area, but the combination of failing daylight and increasingly difficult terrain made effective tracking nearly impossible. Reluctantly, they decided to return to the village and resume the hunt the following morning with fresh men and better equipment. The decision was pragmatic, but deeply unsatisfying given how close they had come to ending the threat. As the hunting party made their way back toward Sankebetsu, they were met by a messenger running toward them through the forest. The young man was clearly exhausted and frightened, stumbling through the snow in his haste to deliver urgent news. His message confirmed the hunters' worst fears. The bear had somehow circled around their position and returned to attack the village once again. The third attack had occurred in the early afternoon while most of the able-bodied men were away pursuing the wounded bear. The predator had taken advantage of the reduced defenses to strike at another isolated house, this time targeting the home of the Ishikawa family. Once again, the bear had gained entry to a human dwelling and killed the occupants inside before anyone could mount an effective defense. The hunting party raced back to the village as quickly as the deep snow and difficult terrain would allow. They arrived to find the settlement in a state of panic that exceeded even the chaos following the previous attacks. The bear's ability to evade its pursuers and return for another assault had shattered what little confidence remained among the villagers. At the Ishikawa house, the scene was grimly familiar. The bear had forced its way inside and killed multiple family members, including Ishikawa's wife and their young daughter. The level of destruction was consistent with the previous attacks, showing the same pattern of overwhelming violence, followed by feeding behavior that confirmed the bear's predatory focus on humans as food sources. What made this attack particularly horrifying was its timing and tactical nature. The bear had clearly waited until the main hunting party was away from the village before striking, demonstrating a level of intelligence and planning that went far beyond normal animal behavior. It was as if the predator understood human defensive patterns and was actively working to exploit weaknesses in the settlement's protection. Following the third attack, the village of Sankebetsu found itself essentially under siege by a single predator that had demonstrated complete mastery over its human prey. Normal life became impossible as families abandoned isolated houses to crowd together in a few central buildings that could be more easily defended. The atmosphere was one of barely controlled panic mixed with grim determination to survive until help could arrive or the bear could be killed. The consolidation of the population created new problems, even as it offered some protection against further attacks. Food supplies that had been carefully rationed for individual families now had to be stretched to feed larger groups, and the overcrowded conditions increased the risk of disease and social friction. Children were kept constantly indoors, while adults took turns maintaining armed watches around the clock. Communication with the outside world became a priority, as the villagers realized they lacked the resources to deal with the crisis alone. Messengers were dispatched to nearby settlements and government offices, requesting immediate assistance in the form of experienced hunters, military personnel, and additional weapons. However, the winter weather and remote location meant that such help might take days or weeks to arrive. The bear's tracks were found regularly around the settlement's perimeter, indicating that the animal was maintaining surveillance of the village and looking for opportunities to strike again. The predator had learned to avoid the areas where guards were posted, instead focusing its attention on buildings that appeared vulnerable or undefended. This behavior further confirmed the intelligence and planning capability that made the situation so dangerous. Several families attempted to flee the village entirely, loading essential supplies onto sleds and heading for larger towns where they hoped to find safety. However, the bear's wide territorial range meant that even evacuation carried significant risks. The predator might encounter and attack fleeing families while they were isolated and vulnerable on forest trails. Those who remained in the village frantically to improve their defenses. Windows and doors were reinforced with heavy timber, while interior barriers were constructed to provide fallback positions if the bear managed to enter a building. Weapons were distributed to every adult capable of using them, and ammunition was carefully rationed to ensure it would be available when most needed. The psychological toll on the villagers was severe. Many had lost family members or close friends in the attacks, while everyone lived in constant fear of becoming the next victim. Children were particularly affected, showing signs of trauma and refusing to sleep alone or venture outside even briefly. The normal social routines that held the community together had been completely disrupted by the ongoing crisis. Word of the bear attacks reached the attention of professional hunters and government officials in the regional capital, leading to the dispatch of a specialized team designed to end the crisis. The group included several men with extensive experience hunting large predators, along with military-trained marksmen and officials responsible for managing wildlife problems in the developing territories. The professional hunters brought with them high-quality rifles and ammunition specifically designed for killing large game. Their weapons were far superior to the improvised arsenal that the villagers had been forced to rely upon, featuring better accuracy, greater stopping power, and more reliable mechanisms that would function properly in cold weather conditions. Most importantly, they brought the skill and experience needed to use these weapons effectively. The leader of the professional hunting team was a man named Yamamoto Heikichi, who had earned a reputation throughout Hokkaido for his ability to track and kill problem bears. He had served in the military during the Russo-Japanese War and subsequently made his living as a hunter and guide, developing an intimate knowledge of bear behavior and the most effective methods for hunting them. Upon arriving in Sankebetsu, Yamamoto and his team conducted a thorough examination of all 3 attack sites, studying the bear's methods and patterns to develop a comprehensive hunting strategy. They noted the animal's preference for entering buildings, its apparent intelligence in timing attacks, and the territorial behavior that kept it operating within a relatively limited area around the village. The professional hunters also examined the tracks and other physical evidence left by the bear, confirming that they were dealing with an exceptionally large male specimen that likely weighed over 400 kilograms. The size of the claw marks and the depth of the track impressions indicated enormous physical strength, while the spacing between prints suggested a bear that stood nearly 3 meters tall when upright. Most significantly, Yamamoto identified several key aspects of the bear's behavior that could be exploited in hunting it. The animal had established a regular pattern of movement around the village, returning to certain areas repeatedly while avoiding others. It showed a preference for attacking during specific times of day when human activity was reduced. These patterns provided the foundation for a systematic hunting strategy. The arrival of professional help boosted morale among the surviving villagers, but it also brought home the reality that they were facing an opponent that required the most skilled hunters in the region to defeat. The bear had proven itself capable of outmaneuvering and evading local hunting parties, suggesting that it was far more dangerous than anyone had initially realized. Yamamoto and his team spent their first day in Sankebetsu, gathering intelligence and preparing for what they hoped would be the definitive hunt to end the bear's reign of terror. They interviewed survivors of the attack, examined physical evidence at all the sites, and studied the various trails and tracks the bear had left throughout the area. The professional hunters identified several key factors that had enabled the bear to survive previous hunting attempts. Local hunters had been poorly coordinated, with different groups pursuing conflicting strategies that allowed the animal to escape pursuit. The weapons used had been inadequate for reliably killing such a large predator, leading to wounds that only made the bear more dangerous. Most critically, the hunting parties had failed to anticipate the animal's intelligence and adaptability. Yamamoto's strategy addressed each of these problems systematically. His team would coordinate all hunting activities to prevent the bear from exploiting gaps in coverage. They would use high-powered rifles with ammunition specifically designed to deliver killing shots to large game. Most importantly, they would treat the bear as an intelligent opponent capable of learning and adapting, rather than as a simple beast driven only by instinct. The professional hunters also established strict safety protocols to protect both themselves and the remaining villagers during the final hunt. Civilians were ordered to remain in designated safe areas and avoid any activity that might interfere with the hunting operation. Guards were posted to ensure the bear could not launch surprise attacks while the hunters were pursuing it elsewhere. On the morning of the 14th of December, Yamamoto's team began their systematic search for the bear's current location. Rather than simply following the most recent tracks, they used their knowledge of bear behavior and the local terrain to predict where the animal was most likely to be found. This approach was designed to locate the bear more quickly and engage it under conditions favorable to the hunters. The search began before dawn, with the hunters moving through the forest in carefully coordinated formations that prevented the bear from escaping through gaps in their coverage. Each man knew his assigned sector and understood how his movements related to those of his teammates. Communication was maintained through a series of predetermined signals that would not alert the bear to their presence. The winter landscape worked both for and against the hunting party. The deep snow made tracking easier by preserving clear evidence of the bear's movements, but it also slowed the hunters and made accurate shooting more difficult due to unstable footing. The bare trees of winter provided better visibility than the thick foliage of warmer seasons, but the gray light and frequent snow flurries could obscure targets at critical moments. The professional hunting team located a fresh bear sign within hours of beginning their search, discovering tracks that appeared to have been made during the previous night. The prints led toward a heavily wooded area with thick underbrush and fallen logs that would provide excellent cover for a large predator. Yamamoto recognized the terrain as ideal bear habitat and likely location for the final confrontation. The hunters approached the area with extreme caution, knowing that the bear might be resting or feeding somewhere within the dense cover. They spread out to surround the suspected location while maintaining visual contact with one another and clear fields of fire that would prevent accidental shooting of fellow hunters. The formation required precise coordination and complete trust among team members. Moving slowly through the thick vegetation, the hunters began finding additional signs of recent bear activity. Claw marks on tree trunks showed where the animal had marked its territory, while disturbed ground revealed feeding sites where it had searched for cached food or winter-dormant prey. The evidence indicated they were very close to their quarry. Yamamoto spotted the bear first, catching sight of its massive dark form moving between the trees roughly 50 meters away. The animal appeared to be feeding on something, though the distance and vegetation made it impossible to determine exactly what. The hunter carefully raised his rifle and prepared to take the shot that would end the crisis that had terrorized Sankebetsu for days. The bear seemed to sense the approaching danger, despite the hunter's careful approach. It raised its enormous head and looked directly toward Yamamoto's position, as if aware of being watched. For a moment, predator and hunter stared at each other across the snowy forest, each assessing the threat posed by the other. Yamamoto fired his first shot when the bear began to move, aiming for the vital chest area that would deliver a quick kill. The bullet struck the animal but did not immediately drop it, causing the massive predator to roar in pain and rage before charging directly toward the hunter's position. The sound echoed through the forest like thunder, audible to every member of the hunting team. The charge covered the distance between bear and hunter with terrifying speed, forcing Yamamoto to fire a second shot at almost point-blank range before diving aside to avoid the animal's claws and teeth. Other hunters opened fire from their positions around the perimeter, sending multiple bullets into the massive target as it wheeled between the trees, seeking escape or another victim to attack. The wounded bear's final moments were a testament to both its incredible toughness and the skill of the professional hunters who had come to destroy it. Despite receiving multiple serious wounds from high-powered rifles, the animal continued fighting with a ferocity that impressed even the experienced men who were killing it. The confrontation lasted only minutes, but those minutes required every bit of skill and courage the hunters possessed. Yamamoto's second shot, fired at close range, struck the bear in the head and caused it to stumble and fall, but the animal immediately regained its feet and attempted to continue its attack. Other hunters fired in rapid succession, placing additional bullets into the predator's chest and shoulders until it finally collapsed into the snow and lay still. Even then, the hunters approached cautiously, keeping their weapons ready in case the bear retained enough strength for a final lunge. The examination of the dead bear confirmed that they had indeed been dealing with an exceptional specimen. The animal measured nearly 3 meters in length and was estimated to weigh over 400 kilograms, making it one of the largest brown bears ever recorded in Hokkaido. Its claws were over 10 centimeters long, while its teeth showed the wear patterns of an old but still powerful predator. Most significantly, the bear's stomach contents confirmed the worst fears about its behavior during the attacks on Sankebetsu. The animal had indeed been feeding on human flesh, treating the villagers as just another prey species to be hunted and consumed. This evidence eliminated any possibility that the attacks had been defensive reactions or cases of mistaken identity. The bear had deliberately chosen to prey upon humans. The hunters also discovered evidence that the bear had been wounded in previous encounters, but had survived and recovered sufficiently to continue hunting. Several old bullet wounds showed scarring and healing that indicated the animal had been shot weeks or months before the recent attacks. This finding suggested that the bear's abnormal behavior might have begun some time before it reached Sankebetsu. News of the bear's death spread quickly through the village, bringing an immediate sense of relief to people who had lived in constant terror for nearly a week. Families began emerging from their fortified shelters, children started playing outside again, and normal activity slowly resumed. The psychological impact of ending the threat was as important as the physical safety the villagers had regained. The bear's body was transported back to the village, where it could be examined more thoroughly, and where the survivors could see for themselves that their tormentor was truly dead. The massive carcass drew crowds of villagers who marveled at its size and tried to comprehend how such a creature could have terrorized their community for so long. The killing of the Sankebetsu bear marked the end of one of the most serious wildlife attacks in Japanese history, but it also began a period of reflection on what had made the incident possible and how similar tragedies might be prevented in the future. The 7 human deaths and 3 serious injuries represented an unprecedented toll from a single predator, raising questions about frontier settlement patterns and wildlife management policy. Investigation into the bear's background revealed that it had likely been driven from its normal territory by human development and forced to seek new food sources in areas where it would inevitably encounter people. The rapid expansion of settlements and logging operations throughout Hokkaido had fragmented bear habitat and created conditions where conflicts between humans and predators became increasingly likely. The bear's abnormally aggressive behavior was attributed to several factors, including its advanced age, previous wounding by hunters, and possible disruption of its normal hibernation cycle by environmental changes. These conditions had combined to create a perfect storm that transformed a normally reclusive animal into an active predator of humans. The response to the crisis also revealed both strengths and weaknesses in the frontier community's ability to deal with emergency situations. The villagers had shown remarkable courage and solidarity in the face of mortal danger, but they had also lacked the specialized knowledge and equipment needed to deal effectively with such an unusual threat. The delay in obtaining professional help had cost additional lives. Changes in government policy followed the incident, including improved systems for reporting and responding to dangerous wildlife encounters, better training for local officials in wildlife management, and enhanced communication networks that could summon expert help more quickly when serious problems arose. These reforms were designed to prevent future tragedies of similar magnitude. The story of the Sankebetsu bear also became part of local folklore and national consciousness, serving as a reminder of the dangers inherent in frontier life and the importance of respecting the power of wild nature. The incident was documented in official records, newspaper accounts, and oral traditions that preserved its lessons for future generations. For the survivors of the attacks, the end of the crisis marked the beginning of a long recovery process. Those who had lost family members faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives while dealing with grief and trauma. The entire community had to work through the psychological effects of living under siege and witnessing unprecedented violence. The Bear of Sankebetsu, known as Kesagake, left a legacy that extended far beyond the immediate tragedy of the December 1915 attack. The incident became a defining moment in the history of Hokkaido's development, illustrating both the opportunities and dangers inherent in Japan's northern frontier. The story was passed down through generations as a cautionary tale about the respect due to wild nature and the importance of preparedness in remote settlements. Scientific study of the incident contributed to improved understanding of brown bear behavior and the conditions that could lead to predatory attacks on humans. Researchers analyzed the bear's actions, its apparent intelligence and adaptability, and the environmental factors that had contributed to its abnormal aggression. This knowledge informed better wildlife management practices and helped prevent similar tragedies. The professional hunting techniques employed by Yamamoto and his team became models for dealing with problem predators throughout Japan and other countries with large bear populations. Their systematic approach, superior equipment, and coordinated tactics demonstrated the importance of bringing appropriate expertise to bear when confronting dangerous wildlife situations. The incident also influenced Japanese policies regarding frontier settlement and wildlife conservation. Authorities recognized the need for better planning that took into account wildlife habitat requirements and migration patterns. Buffer zones were established around settlements to reduce the likelihood of human-wildlife conflicts, while improved monitoring systems were implemented to track potentially dangerous animals. The memory of the Sankebetsu bear attacks continued to influence the behavior of rural communities throughout Hokkaido and other frontier regions. Families became more cautious about isolated living situations, while villages invested in better defensive preparations and communication systems that could summon help quickly in emergency situations. Educational programs were developed to teach settlers about bear behavior and safety precautions, helping future pioneers avoid the mistakes that had made the Sankebetsu tragedy possible. These initiatives emphasize the importance of proper food storage, home security, and community coordination in areas where large predators were present. The story of Kesagake became embedded in Japanese popular culture through books, films, and television programs that retold the events for new audiences. While these adaptations sometimes took liberties with historical accuracy, they served to keep alive the memory of the incident and its lessons about the relationship between humans and nature. Most importantly, the Bear of Sankebetsu stands as a reminder that the natural world retains the power to humble human ambitions, and that respect for wild creatures must be maintained even as civilization advances into previously untamed territories. The 7 people who died in those December days of 1915 paid the ultimate price for this lesson, ensuring that their sacrifice would not be forgotten by those who followed them into the wilderness. The winter of 1915 had passed into history, but the lessons learned in the snows around Sankebetsu would inform human behavior in wild places for generations to come. The Bear of Sankebetsu had earned its place as one of the most significant wildlife encounters in recorded history, a story of predator and prey that revealed fundamental truths about survival on the frontier.